They are perfect.
Thank you.
You look handsome.
Only because of you.
But she really did. John Monroe sat motionless in his high-rise penthouse, the city skyline stretching out before him like a polished glass painting. Lights flickered from distant buildings, but inside, everything was still. The only item out of place in the minimalist room was a gilded invitation card on the table beside him. You are cordially invited to the 80th birthday celebration of Mrs. Margaret Monroe. Saturday, 6 p.m. Formal attire. He stared at it with a blank expression, his fingers resting against his temple, the knot of his tie still tight against his throat. His mother's voice, calm but commanding, echoed in his mind from the phone call just hours earlier. This time, John, you have to come. And you should bring a girlfriend. The whole family is waiting for you to finally settle down. Settle down. As if love could be drafted, scheduled, and presented like a quarterly report. He had no desire to entertain anyone, least of all his family's expectations. But when it came to his mother, saying no wasn't really an option. She had held the family together after his father passed, bearing the weight of legacy on her own shoulders, and his grandmother, Margaret Monroe, had believed in him when no one else did. Not when he broke off an arranged engagement, not when he risked everything to build his own empire. He owed her at least this. Still, showing up empty-handed would only ignite another storm of lectures. He needed someone. A stand-in. Someone believable enough to quiet the questions. Temporarily. That afternoon, in a small cafe tucked between tall office towers, a young woman moved behind the counter, wiping down the glass display filled with pastries. Her blonde hair, loosely tied with an old ribbon, framed a face marked by fatigue but softened with resolve. Janice, 24. A part-time barista, part-time baker. John had seen her before, many times actually, but never really looked at her until that day. She was crouched next to a little girl, gently dabbing a scoop of spilled ice cream from the child's shirt while offering a reassuring smile to the flustered mother. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. There was something raw and real in the way she moved, like she had no time for pretense. When he approached the counter, she straightened, brushing flour from her fingers. "I have a proposal," he said, voice low and steady. "Not quite legal, but fair." She blinked. "Excuse me? Come with me this weekend. Pretend to be my girlfriend. $2,000. No strings after." Janice stared at him like he had just stepped off a spaceship. A man in a designer coat offering money for fake affection? She let out a short laugh, incredulous. "You think money buys everything, don't you?" He didn't flinch. "I think, considering your situation, money could help. And I need discretion. We both benefit." Her breath caught. How did he know? "I will come," she said after a pause, her voice quieter now. "But I'm not lying about who I am. I'm poor. I bake bread, my mom's sick. If someone asks, I'll tell the truth." He nodded, slightly surprised. "I'm not asking you to lie. Just pretend you care about me." In front of them. Something shifted in her expression, a shadow flickering across her eyes. It was a look he couldn't quite place, like she was remembering something painful. "I'll pretend," she said. "But if, at some point I actually start to care, that's not part of your deal." John's grip tightened around the coffee cup in his hand. He had not expected that. As she turned back to her duties, her hair lifted lightly with her movement. The sunlight pouring through the window caught the strands like golden thread. She didn't look back. He stood there longer than necessary, watching her, and for the first time in years, something unfamiliar stirred in his chest. It was not part of the plan, but plans had never stopped fate before. The car rolled to a slow stop in front of a wrought iron gate, intricately carved with climbing roses and swirls of antique scrollwork. As if sensing their arrival, the gate creaked open, revealing a cobblestone path flanked by rows of blooming rose bushes and meticulously trimmed hedges. The estate stretched before them like something out of a period film, grand, timeless, and overwhelmingly elegant. Janice sat still for a moment, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She watched through the tinted glass as the car approached the ivory-colored mansion with European architecture, arched windows, wrought iron balconies, and brass lanterns glowing warmly along the portico. A doorman stepped forward to open the vehicle. John got out first, composed and unreadable as always. Then it was her turn. Janice emerged slowly, her soft blue dress fluttering in the afternoon breeze. Her blonde hair, gently curled at the ends, caught the light as she glanced up at the sprawling estate. For a heartbeat she felt entirely out of place, like a page torn from the wrong book. This is his world, she thought, chest tightening, and I don't belong in it. But still, she smiled, calm and graceful, and walked beside him, shoulders back, head high. Inside, the grandeur was even more pronounced. The foyer opened into a vast living room, where sunlight filtered through tall glass panes, pooling onto plush crimson carpets and oil paintings gilded in gold. At the center sat an elegant woman in a wheelchair, Mrs. Margaret Monroe. Her silver white hair was twisted into a neat bun. She wore a deep violet silk blouse with a brooch at her collar, her eyes sharp despite her age. Several family members stood around her, engaged in muted conversation, until John and Janice stepped into view. The room stilled. "Grandma," John said, his tone firm but void of warmth. "This is Janice." Janice stepped forward, bowed her head slightly, and spoke softly but clearly. "It's an honor to meet you, ma'am." Margaret studied her in silence, eyes narrowing just a touch, not hostile, but discerning. She nodded once, offering no smile. But she did not look away. That night the grand ballroom came alive with glittering lights and clinking champagne glasses. Men in tailored suits and women in evening gowns mingled beneath cascading chandeliers. A string quartet played somewhere near the back, their melody floating through the air like perfume. Janice, in a pale blue gown John had arranged for her, stood beside him quietly. Her hair fell loosely over her shoulders, held back by a simple pearl clip. She didn't speak unless spoken to, but she observed everything, especially the woman at the end of the long dining table. Margaret Monroe, flanked by servers and family, reached shakily for her teacup. No one seemed to notice the tremor in her hands. Except Janice. Without a word, she stood, walked across the room, and gently wrapped a light shawl over Margaret's hands. "Your hands are cold," she said gently. "Let me help keep them warm." Margaret looked up, startled. Her stern features softened just slightly as she replied, "Thank you, dear." It was only 2 words. But from her, it was enough to make a few eyebrows rise. From across the room, John had been mid-conversation with a potential business partner when he saw it. The way Janice moved, unannounced, unafraid, just quietly kind. His gaze lingered on her longer than it should have. She said she'd pretend to care, he thought, but what if this isn't pretending? Then a thought came unbidden. And what about me? What if something real is starting that was never in the agreement? Meanwhile, Janice returned to her seat, picking up her untouched glass of juice. She glanced at her phone. No messages. Her mother was still in the hospital, and every second away felt like a gamble. But she stayed. "I'm here for a job," she reminded herself silently. "Do it well. Don't get soft." Still, she couldn't deny the flicker of warmth that had sparked in Margaret's eyes, or the way John's expression had changed when he looked at her. For the first time in a long while, she felt something that terrified her. Like maybe, just maybe, she was being seen and accepted. The sun was still low on the horizon when Janice opened her eyes to soft birdsong and the faint aroma of brewed coffee wafting through the mansion's halls. She sat up slowly, brushed a lock of blonde hair behind her ear, and tied it back with her worn fabric ribbon. The luxury of the guest room still overwhelmed her, silken sheets, velvet curtains, but she didn't linger. She made her way downstairs, her footsteps silent against the marble floor, and found the kitchen already alive with quiet movements. A housekeeper was arranging fruit on silver trays. Without being asked, Janice slipped on an apron and offered her hands. "May I help?" The staff exchanged quick glances. This wasn't expected from a guest, but her tone was warm, unassuming. A moment later, she was slicing apples with practiced ease, arranging them into a delicate spiral for the tarts she was baking. The scent of butter, cinnamon, and sugar began to fill the kitchen, comforting and nostalgic. It reminded her of home, of mornings with her mother before the diagnosis, of something real. John came downstairs just after 7, still in slacks and a white button-down shirt, no tie. He paused in the hallway, frowning slightly as the sweet smell reached him. Curious, he followed the scent and stepped into the kitchen, only to stop at the doorway. Janice stood at the counter, rolling out pastry dough, her sleeves pushed up, a smudge of flour on her cheek. Her blonde waves glowed in the warm kitchen light. She looked peaceful, capable. He hadn't expected that. "You're baking?" he asked, voice low. She turned, startled but not embarrassed. Old habits die hard. He nodded, hands in his pockets. "I don't remember the last time this place smelled like that." She smiled faintly. "Maybe it needs to more often." Later that morning, Janice found Mrs. Margaret Monroe near the garden room, waiting in her wheelchair. Without being prompted, she asked, "May I take you for a stroll?" The older woman didn't answer right away. Then, with a slight incline of her head, she consented. Outside, the garden glistened with dew. The roses were in bloom, and the sun filtered through the trellises like gold through lace. They moved slowly along the stone path, Margaret quiet at first. But Janice didn't fill the silence with empty talk. She simply observed the flowers, complimented the roses, and finally spoke up, gently. "I used to bake apple pie with my mom every Sunday. The whole house would smell like nutmeg." Margaret's gaze shifted. "That was my husband's favorite. He used to ask the chef to burn the crust a little." Janice laughed, surprised. "Burnt crust? That's a bold choice." The older woman chuckled. A real, honest sound. It echoed through the quiet garden like a breeze through leaves. For the first time in months, her caretaker noted later, she had smiled. Unbeknownst to them, John stood at the upstairs window, watching. He had come to check on the garden renovations, but he froze when he saw the two women together. The sound of his grandmother's laughter caught him off guard. And so did the expression on Janice's face, open, genuine, completely without calculation. He watched them for a long time, without saying a word. That evening, as Janice passed by one of the long hallways, she heard voices behind a slightly ajar door. John's voice, raised, controlled, but intense. "She doesn't understand, Mother. You think I don't want to settle down. Every woman I meet sees the surname, the company, the bank account, not me." A second voice, softer but firm. "You were born into this family. With it comes responsibility." John's voice again, bitter. "And what if I don't want to be their puppet?" Janice stepped back quietly, heart tight. Later, as they crossed paths on the patio, he seemed quieter, his jaw tense. "You okay?" she asked, hesitant. He glanced at her, surprised. "Why? You looked like someone just shoved a mountain onto your back." He gave a soft, humorless chuckle. "That obvious?" She met his eyes. "No one can force you to be something you're not. Accept yourself." For a long moment, John didn't respond. But something shifted behind his gaze, like a door cracked open. He nodded once, just once. And that was the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. The late afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of the Monroe estate, casting long golden beams across the polished wooden floors. In the drawing room, remnants of the afternoon tea lingered, half-finished cups of Earl Grey, a nearly empty plate of scones, and laughter that had only recently faded into quiet murmurs. Janice had been the last to leave. She stayed back to help the maid pick up scattered napkins and right a toppled vase. It felt natural, instinctual. She never could sit still while others worked. She folded a linen cloth, adjusted a tray, and left the room quietly, unaware that her generosity had just painted a target on her back. In the hallway upstairs, Vanessa watched from the shadows. With her arms crossed and a sneer hidden behind her perfect lipstick, she held a small velvet pouch in her palm. Inside it, the heirloom necklace of Margaret Monroe, a delicate gold chain with a teardrop sapphire, passed down through generations. Vanessa had once imagined herself standing beside John, but now all she saw was a blonde-haired baker stealing every glance, every soft word from his lips, every inch of respect from their grandmother. That would not do. She waited until the coast was clear, then descended to the coat closet, slipping the pouch into the inner pocket of Janice's jacket. An hour later, as the family gathered again for an evening digestive in the lounge, Margaret's sharp voice rang out. "My necklace. It's missing." Gasps broke the lull. Servants were questioned. Drawers and side tables were checked. No one knew where it had gone. Vanessa stepped forward, a calculated tremble in her voice. "It's probably just misplaced, Grandma, but maybe we should check the room where we had tea." Everyone turned toward her. John stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, his brow furrowed. In the dining room, coats were being brought in from the closet. Just to be sure, Vanessa's voice rang out again. "Here. This one's hers, right?" she said, lifting Janice's soft gray coat. "Maybe we should just check all pockets, to rule things out." Janice blinked, frozen in place. "That's not necessary." But it was too late. Vanessa's hand dipped into the inside pocket. Her voice, sweet as syrup, turned dramatic. "Oh no, Grandma, it's here." She held the pouch aloft, like a magician, revealing a trick. The room erupted. "What is going on?" "Are you sure?" "Unbelievable." Margaret said nothing. Her eyes were narrowed, locked on Janice, unreadable. Janice felt everything drain from her face. Her throat tightened. The air grew thick. She tried to breathe, but her lungs refused. I didn't touch it," she managed. John took a step forward, but the whispers had already begun to circle her like smoke. Vanessa shrugged. "Maybe it was an accident. Things get picked up by mistake all the time." "I didn't take it," Janice repeated, louder this time, but not angry, only tired. Her hands trembled. Silence followed. Even John didn't speak, not yet. Margaret finally spoke, softly. "I don't believe you would do that, child, but this is difficult." That sentence broke her. Janice turned, quietly, and walked toward the door. John moved to stop her, but her voice came first. "Don't," she said, firm and full of heartbreak. "I know what this looks like, and I know no one here will really believe me. Not when I'm just the hired girlfriend with no last name worth anything." She opened the door. "You asked me to pretend," she said, turning her gaze briefly to John. "But I didn't pretend to care. That part was real. Maybe that's why this hurts more than it should." And with that, she left. Outside, the wind whipped around her as she pulled the coat, that coat, tighter. Her cheeks were wet, but she didn't wipe them. She walked down the long stone path, her boots echoing against the past. Behind her, no one called out. And that silence, more than the accusation, was what hurt the most. The mansion was quiet in early morning light. John Monroe sat alone in his study, the soft hum of the air conditioner the only sound. A printout of the security camera feed lay open on the mahogany desk. The file was time-stamped, 10:47 p.m., the night the heirloom pendant went missing. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the footage. Vanessa Monroe's reflection in the hallway mirror, moving slowly, deliberately, her hand slipping into Janice's coat pocket. The pendant glinted in her palm for a second, before she tucked it away. John exhaled sharply. For all his wealth, for all his power, this was one of the hardest things he had ever done. He needed to stand up for what was right, even at the risk of shattering the family facade. He called the one person he trusted, Mr. Howard, the longtime butler and head of household staff. "Howard," John said into the phone, voice low and controlled. "I need your help. Access the cameras. Check the hallway, the stairwell, the kitchen corridor. I don't want a scandal, I want clarity." Howard's reply was quiet and firm. "Very well, sir. I will send you the footage." Over the next few hours, John reviewed every angle. The pause when Vanessa's coat brushed the hall rail, the tiny spark of metal disappearing into her hand, Janice walking past seconds later, unaware. The truth was clear. The accusation against Janice was false. He stood and went into the drawing room. Family members were assembling for brunch, soft murmurs filling the air. He stepped into the center of the room. "Enough," he said, voice deep and unflinching. The chatter stopped. Vanessa looked up, her face composed, at first, then anxiety flickered. John pulled out the printouts, laid them on the coffee table. "I have reviewed the security footage. It shows the heirloom locket was placed in Janice's coat pocket by Miss Vanessa Monroe." A ripple of shock passed through the room. Mrs. Margaret Monroe leaned forward, her eyes narrowing at her granddaughter. "How dare you?" Margaret said slowly, voice steel-coated. "In this house, the one who loses value is not you, child, but jealousy." Her voice echoed. Vanessa swayed, expression crumbling. The family watchers gasped. John held his ground. Turning to Janice, he said, "I asked you to help me, pretend you cared for me so I could appease my grandmother and my family, but I lied you into my world." Janice's eyes widened, but she stayed silent. John's voice softened. In the process, I discovered that I did care about you. More than I knew. I trusted you. I believed in your kindness. I fell in love with you, not because you proved anything, but because you were yourself. Silence filled the room. Janice's gaze fell to the floor. Then she looked at Mrs. Margaret, who offered a small, honest nod. John continued, I am sorry I treated you as a placeholder, but I cannot ask you to be one any longer. Janice swallowed. A tear slid down her cheek. She stepped forward. Thank you, she said softly. John waited. No applause, no grand declaration, just truth. In that moment, the dynamics shifted. Vanessa backed away, shamed. Family members whispered. Janice stood upright, the fear and shame drained. And John, standing beside her, felt the weight of his own words lift. When brunch resumed, the morning light seemed warmer. The family table was still long, the mansion still grand, but something had changed. A sense of realism settled in. Authenticity mattered more than appearances. And for Janice and John, the real journey was just beginning. Not with a contract, not with a facade, but with something genuine. Back in the city, Janice slipped quietly into her old rhythm, as if the weekend in the grand estate had been nothing more than a passing dream. Each morning, she woke up before dawn, tied her golden hair back with the same worn ribbon, and walked the short distance to the small bakery. The streets smelled of morning rain and car exhaust. The bell above the bakery door chimed like it always did, welcoming her back with a familiar jingle. She put on her apron, dusted with flour, and began kneading dough. The scent of cinnamon rolls and warm butter filled the air. It should have comforted her, but there was an ache she couldn't bake away. To her co-workers, she seemed unchanged, quiet, steady, the same girl with flour on her cheeks and kindness in her smile. But Janice knew better. Something inside her had shifted. Each night, after her shift ended, she would stop by the hospital to see her mother. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and quiet hope.